Hello everyone! Welcome to yet another day in the clown decade. The decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And things have got so bad in the UK that my title for this video today is only a little bit tongue-in-cheek. No doubt Channel 4 will try and claim this video for monetization or something like that with the amount I'm going to go through of their reporting, but the things I'm going through today, I just couldn't pass up. So first things first, Channel 4 asked, how are Ukrainian refugees handling cultural integration in ethnically diverse areas of the UK? And if me or you, dear viewer, were to answer that question, we would probably answer, well, they'll probably get culture shock, as it won't be what they are expecting, whereas Channel 4 News would probably say, well, the rest of the world's ethnically diverse, why wouldn't they be used to it in Britain? So let's have a look at this reporting.
We've always hosted lots and lots of people. Never quite so long as 6 months.
It's a long time.
So it is a long time, and I think we hadn't necessarily taken into consideration the cultural differences.
My lord, this sounds like the UK government. So just to catch you up, this woman signed up for the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which essentially said, I have room in my house, I will put some refugees in here for the time being. And it has been 6 months, and apparently the Ukrainians are hella based.
She lives in a diverse part of Birmingham. After a week of staying there, her guests told her there were too many Muslims in the area.
Incredible. Ukrainian comes over to Britain, expects a Christian country, probably full of white people, with pretty much everyone speaking English, and who knows, maybe they have the stereotype of everyone drinks tea, eats biscuits and wears a top hat outside. But no, this refugee comes over and with a week she is going full-blown gammon. I've got to appreciate that.
We were quite shocked at how difficult she found different cultures.
She felt there were just too many Muslims.
Too many Muslims, too many people with different skin colours.
Yeah, it's actually a really weird scenario if you're outside of Western Europe. Eastern Europe doesn't have much diversity, and I mean the real type of diversity. Most people in those countries, even in the big cities, will be pretty homogenous when it comes to skin colour. Now, do I think it's an issue that there's lots of skin colour? Not by itself, no. I think there is an issue of having 500,000 net immigrants come over in the previous year. Now, while having a lot of people with different skin colours is a consequence of that, that isn't a consequence I'm particularly worried about. Now, the problem is that when you bring in 500,000 people and they're all from different parts of the world, and different parts of the world don't particularly like each other, like Ukraine and Russia, then those problems are going to start springing up within the United Kingdom. And over in Eastern Europe, where they're a little bit closer to the Muslim world, yeah, there's going to be a bit more tension in that way.
Her guest's son was enrolled into the local school, where the majority of children happen to be black and Asian.
Again, the language here is a bit odd. It's, oh, people just happen to be black and Asian here. No, the reason they're black and Asian is because most people who immigrate to the country, they actually want to be in areas where there are other people like them. It's just human nature. This is why a lot of white British people from cities are moving out to either suburbs or to rural areas. But they're not allowed to say these things. A Ukrainian coming over and you can just say, oh, she doesn't understand what it's like here. She's allowed to point out these problems.
And then to just have her complain about the demographic of the school and going, well, he can't be safe there. There's not enough white kids, essentially.
Yeah, people from outside the UK who don't understand you're not allowed to say things like this will of course be saying things like this. Now the thing is, the woman is saying that her son can't be safe in a school where there are a lot of non-white people because they're non-white. That is the assumption going on here. And it can't be that bad a thing to say because the refugee is still in that home. Yet I do find it a bit odd that they are interviewing the host rather than the actual refugee here, but who knows, maybe we'll get into what the refugee has to say.
The majority of my neighbours are Muslims, a lot of them are Kashmiris or Pakistanis, Indians, and they're wonderful people. And you just felt if you just would sort of give them the time, perhaps we'd come to the same conclusion.
I mean, I have some Indian neighbours, some Pakistani neighbours, not too many of them, and they are really good neighbours, to be fair. So it's not the case that every time you get immigration, you get more and more problems. However, I think you would be very surprised if you moved over to the Ukraine and started seeing a lot of Muslims everywhere, a lot of black people everywhere, or just think of any demographic that isn't Ukrainian. And you probably would actually be quite surprised. Because, to be frank, we probably know more about Ukraine than Ukraine knows about us at the moment, given the war. But when Ukrainians are in a very homogenous society and then they all of a sudden come over to Western Europe where it's a bit more diverse, as they say, you know, there's quite a bit more of the global majority here, then yeah, it's a culture shock. And I'm not being funny, but when news goes international of terrorist attacks in the UK, a few in the past decade have been from white people for no discernible reason, but I think it's fair to say the majority of them do come from Islamists. So it is only natural that she would be worried about that. Whereas if you live in an area with other Muslims and they are perfectly good neighbours, you're of course going to think, well, they're fine, just give them a chance.
They both agreed to end the placement.
It is just quite funny to think that, okay, your home's being blown to bits at the moment, but you're a bit too racist for me, please. I think we should both mutually agree that you should move. I mean, it is quite a thing to say as well, to be fair, from the Ukrainian refugee of, I live in quite a diverse area, but I don't feel entirely safe here. I'm going to take my chances elsewhere, and I know elsewhere includes going back to war-torn Ukraine.
Britain is, of course, far more ethnically and religiously diverse than Ukraine. Could more be done to help the refugees who have settled here to integrate?
It's parts like this that make me really, really uncomfortable with what Channel 4's values are here. It's just an assumption that being more religiously and ethnically pluralistic is just a good thing by itself. Whereas my take is slightly more nuanced than that, let's say. And instead of it being a time for reflection on Channel 4's own values, they take it as a chance to say, oh, this is the obvious right thing, how do we integrate people who expect a different type of Britain? When really the question is, why are they expecting that type of Britain, and why isn't it the way they expected it? And if there are bad reasons within there, why don't we do something to stop it? No, it's just the assumption that everything culturally in the UK is good and sound, and they should integrate and learn to love that. Which, if you're a follower of my channel, you will know that that is not my thinking on the subject.
It's a question that's been debated with each new wave of immigration over the decades.
Yeah, and you constantly have to change it. I mean, it still blows my mind that in a Christian country, when you take a religious education GCSE, you actually have the options on which religions you can get the GCSE on. Whether it be Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, I think Sikhism's one of them as well. When really, to my mind, if it's a Christian country and the head of state is a Church of England Christian, then I'd have that as the standard religious education GCSE, rather than basically having it as multiple choice of which one of the 4 religions are you going to answer about. But I wouldn't be surprised if they keep adding on to things like that in the future. And then of course you've got the universities getting rid of ye olde English texts to be replaced by modern authors to decolonise the curriculum. And as Channel 4 implies, the more immigrants we get, the more that is going to happen.
For people who aren't from the UK, they don't realise there's lots of people that look like me here. And that can be quite like, wow, you know, I thought England was full of English people. And it is, because I'm English.
This is, again, where I have a bit of a differing opinion. The accent's clearly English, yes, fair enough, and this is where ethnicity gets all a bit confusing. And I will expand on this in the next Channel 4 coverage they go through. Because the thing is, you'd expect an English person to say, oh, here's my English heritage, you know. My grandmother was from Sandwich down south, my grandparents were from Manchester. Go beyond that, they'll be in towns and cities in the Victorian times. Maybe there'll be 1 or 2 Irish ancestors in there, you never know. But the problem is we've had so much immigration over the last 15 years that really most people aren't really calling themselves English, they're calling themselves Afro-Caribbean, or some sort of British Indian or something like that. There's always a mixture, and to be quite frank, I think the term British Indian or British Afro-Caribbean, something like that, I think that's perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable, and I think that shows a good level of integration. However, I don't particularly like it when people like this, say David Lammy, say, oh, I'm English. Because to me, that would be like a colonial British man, say George Orwell, learning the language of the Indian, living in India, and then saying I'm Indian when he clearly isn't, because he speaks very good English, is an English journalist, has English parents, and comes from an English colony. Now, I don't think he actually did ever learn Indian, this is hypothetical. Now, I'd find that very odd, and, you know, when I say he speaks the local language in India, the problem with English is that it's spoken all over the world by so many different countries that I don't think it's fair to say I'm English because I speak English. However, if you're born and raised in Britain and, you know, both your parents say are from the Caribbean or something like that, and you've lived your whole life in Britain, speak the language pretty well, know the history to a good extent, and are clearly integrated, you can call yourself British whatever you want, in my mind. We did used to rule a third of the globe, and all it really means is subject to the crown, so I'm going on a long-winded way to say it would be fine there if she said she was British, but saying English I'm a bit iffy on.
But I just look very different.
See, I am English, I just don't look English. It's the implication that she knows that saying she's English is wrong, but she's saying it anyway. And I don't think there's ill intent here at all. I just think there's a confusion of these terms. But as Channel 4 News say, these things are constantly debated over and over and over. And if you're just going to reduce English to mean person in England, then it's a meaningless term.
Defining diversity. When this refugee support group recognised the problem, they organised this workshop for Ukrainians who have settled here.
So many Ukrainians effectively turn out to be gamins that local councils, local community groups, whatever, they had to say, right, we have to teach them to stop seeing things and talking about them, basically. Because this is a bit different to when the Americans came over in World War II and were stationed in the UK, when racism in the UK was vastly less of an issue than over in the US. And there just had to be public service announcements to the Americans here, basically saying, look, in Britain, we actually just treat everyone equally. So you jarheads have to do it too. I know it's different to at home, but, you know, you've got to actually be civilised here. And really, I'm going to have to see details into what these community groups teach. Because if this was the introduction, then it's just going to confuse the Ukrainians more, I'm sad to say.
Do you find that there are assumptions made about yourself when you walk into a room like this?
Yeah, you know, I'm a 6 foot tall black woman, so yeah, I'm sure when they came in, I could see people really clutching their handbags, but by the time we'd kind of got into it, you know, people had warmed up, there was lots more smiles, they were talking to each other, so I feel like we got it just about right.
See, if that's it, if it's just nice people having a chat and basically trying to be friendly with these refugees and acting normally and not trying to instill any indoctrination or leftist ideology into them, that's absolutely fine, because that is breaking down racial stereotypes and racial barriers, and that's something I absolutely fully support. But the reason I'm covering this, as I say, is because Channel 4 are reporting this as if they're surprised about it. Given how pro-Ukraine the entire media seems to be, it is quite funny to see Channel 4 having to go, actually, the Ukrainians are a bit more racist than we thought.
The government told us they provide councils with £10,500 per refugee to help Ukrainians fully integrate. That funding has been halved for new arrivals.
£5,000 funding from the government per refugee to councils to integrate them. I'm not being funny, but their problem isn't actually with English people. I think that's the funny part about this. This must be like whiplash to some people watching it. They might finally understand white flight.
This workshop is a voluntary scheme, one of the very few in the country, and there's no specific funding for it.
So what happened to the 10,000 or 5,000 now pounds sent by the government to the councils per refugee? Because there are at least 10 refugees in there. That's nearly £100,000 or 50,000 now. I mean, it's no wonder inflation's high if money's just being sent to integrate refugees. Ukrainian ones specifically. Did we ever have schemes like that for Afghanistani refugees, for Syrian refugees, anything like that? Because this is the first I've heard of an integration payment scheme.
And that kind of keeps happening. If you look back at, you know, previous waves of immigration, exactly the same things were said. People like, actually, it would have been really helpful to have had a bit of guidance, to understand the city, and we just don't seem to be able to fix it.
See, it's the weird thing here. It's, oh, I need help integrating. This city wasn't how I expected it. And she's saying it's like that from previous refugees as well. That her workshop of, oh, by the way, not everyone in Britain, in fact, most people in British cities aren't actually white, just so you know. It does make you wonder, was this a common thought and a common problem before 1997 and any refugees who came over before then? I know what my money's on.
Olga arrived here in October with her son.
For us, it's rather like amazing to see so much religion, so much ethnicities.
So this refugee has been here for about 4 months, and she still looks shocked. She still has massive culture shock because of the fact that she's not actually seeing as many English people as she thought she would in an English city. I mean, I suppose it's good that the reporting is not trying to deny that this thing's happening. They just openly say, oh yeah, of course there's not as many white people as there were in the past. But I just suppose it's how much of a different perspective these reporters have than, say, me, who looks a lot at these problems, listens to everyone who talks about these problems, and can understand why it would be shocking, let alone from someone from the Ukraine. Imagine telling someone in the year 1980 that Birmingham and London were going to be majority minority. I think they'd be as shocked as this woman.
What did you feel about the workshop today and what you learned?
British people, it's not only white English people, it's all people here is British. So for us it was very important to understand it from their history.
£10,000 per refugee right there, folks. It took £10,000 to let her know that there are a lot of non-white people in Britain. And she still looks uncomfortable saying that fact, but to be fair, that might be because she's camera shy.
From the best area of Kiev, where I became to the worst area of the Birmingham, unfortunately.
I mean, on one hand, beggars can't be choosers. On the other hand, you're at a workshop that's there to basically let you know that there are a lot of non-white people there, and you call areas where you need that integration training the worst area of Birmingham. I'm not going to lie, I do find that quite funny.
Oksana moved here from Kyiv last summer. She admits that at first, living side by side with so many different cultures made her feel afraid.
I mean, it's kind of like a no-dir to me. Again, as said before, if I'm going to a different country, what I understand of that country I expect to be the norm. But the thing is, because the Cultural Revolution has happened so quickly in Britain, it's taken less than 2 decades. No, I'm wrong there, it's taken 2.5 decades. That now Channel 4 News will just report it as normal that majority of English cities have a white English minority. They'll just report that as fact and say it like it's obvious, but that's not obvious to a lot of people within the UK, let alone outside of it. So when you come over, you expect English people who are, if not Christian, culturally Christian and atheist. And instead you get people from practically all over the world, although to be fair, it is mainly ex-empire countries, with a lot of different religions that you don't really know because you won't have been looking into it, because you will have been looking into the United Kingdom. Then yeah, you're going to get quite a bit of a shock.
I was very afraid because it was not usually for me, and and some people just told me about so many dangerous stories.
Those stories, Oksana says, included cases about Islamic terrorism.
I don't know what it is, but the way that that line's been delivered, it's like these stories that obviously aren't real. I don't know if that's the intention, but that is how it comes across. And as I said before, if you're getting worldwide news stories of Islamic terror attack in Britain, of which we've had our fair few, then yeah, you're going to make bold assumptions. And in the United Kingdom, there is clearly a big push to try and say these attacks are very, very rare, and a lot of Muslims do not support these actions. And that is absolutely true. But as we can see, when the Ukrainians get the bad news of Islamic terrorist attack, they then don't get the push for #NotAllMuslims. But the thing that Channel 4 don't understand is that how are we even in a position where we are getting these terrorist attacks from foreign ideologies? I mean, an asylum seeker from Afghanistan who claimed to be 14 and was 21, I think they murdered someone in Serbia, had their application denied by Norway, managed to get in the UK, get in the foster system, and then stab a person who wants to be a Royal Marine. And no doubt Ukrainians will have seen that news. What are they going to think about that? I mean, I'd love to interview some of these Ukrainians and really get down and see what they think about essentially news reporters ignoring cases like this and just saying, oh no, you've got absolutely no reason to be worried. Because I'm not going to lie, in a country that's had a lot of terrorist attacks, and then for the Mayor of London to say that's just part and parcel of living in a big city, yeah, no dirt if you are a refugee in a big city, you're going to worry about that.
Lots of people here would feel very offended that you feel just because it's a mixed area, it's not safe.
I saw statistics on the police website, police, and so I saw statistics of criminals instead of it. And also I read in the internet in English when I began that this is the area from, terrorism.
Oh my God, the reporter, a lot of people find what you say offensive. Yeah, well, they should stop committing crimes. That is essentially what she just said to her. And honestly, that is... Again, it is because she's foreign. You would not catch an Englishman saying this. But effectively, having a whole day told to you of, oh, don't worry about it, look, some of us are normal, they will probably go away and say, okay, I will go ahead with an open mind from now on. But I don't think you're ever going to get away from the fact that if you feel like you've got facts on your side, and in this case you absolutely will, then there's no way you're going to integrate them into a society that they assumed was civil. There's just no way you're going to do that.
Oksana has now moved to a new area.
I imagine it's a place with lower crime statistics on all counts. But this is white flight on roids in this case. She will not be the only Ukrainian to have moved due to not feeling safe in a rather diverse area. The thing is, this is all happening within about 6 months, whereas in the UK in general it's been a process happening over about 2 decades, so you don't see it as quickly. But I would love to see a heat map of where Ukrainians first moved into and then where they've moved into at least 6 months later, because I somehow think that data will be very similar to data of people who used to live in big cities and where they live 10 years later. But anyway, I thought it would be quite funny for all of you to get a video at the weekend where it turns out that no, the English are not particularly racist, especially when you actually compare it to other real people instead of a hypothetical utopia. Hopefully in a few months Channel 4 News will do another interview style like this for Ukrainian refugees that have moved out of these areas and have their opinions on the new place they moved to, assuming my hypothetical of them moving to areas with less crime being true, whether they're diverse or not. I would love to get their opinions on it. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.